This is Common Ground. My name is Sonja Wolf, and we're back with Professor Bill Hing, Professor of Law and Migration Studies and the author of Humanizing Immigration. So this is a second episode to talk about the racism of the US immigration system. And today I wanted to ask Professor Bill Hing to talk about immigration courts and the asylum process. Welcome back, Professor.
Thank you very much.
So I thought we could start with the asylum process. People claim asylum for very different reasons in the United States, and the US asylum law is based on the international framework. Is this framework still fit for purpose?
Well, the framework is old. It's been with us since the early 1950s and reaffirmed in the late 1960s. And the problem is that it was based on an understanding of refugees post World War II. And now the type of violence that people are fleeing is not simply about the kind of oppression that we saw in World War II and anti-communism and anti-Nazism, that kind of thing. Now we're seeing gangs and cartels and different types of political situations, and we're also seeing a lot of people fleeing from domestic violence, and so it is a real problem that today's world is quite different. And that's the big elephant in the room, to be honest with you, is the problem with respect to climate. And the climate change is causing a variety of movement and displacement. And nowhere in the current refugee regime is there questions about how to address climate migration.
Many individuals from Mexico and Central America claim asylum in the United States due to domestic or gang violence. There is the figure of the Attorney General. What is that person's role in asylum law? How does it impact asylum decisions?
That's such a good question. The system in the United States is very subject to the political whims of the president and the attorney general that he appoints. And so for your listeners, the attorney general is head of something called the Department of Justice in the United States, and housed within the Department of Justice are the immigration courts. The immigration courts are not regular courts. They're not independent. They're not independent judges or immigration system. They're subject to the direction of the chief of the Department of Justice, and that is the Attorney General of the United States, and the Attorney General is appointed by the president. So what that means is that if the Attorney General, so the immigration judges are the ones that make the final decision on whether or not somebody's granted asylum. And so if the Attorney General wants to give them specific direction on who should be granted asylum, the Attorney General has that power. And so when Mr. Obama was the president, it was possible to get asylum if the person had good evidence that a gang was going to kill or torture you. It was possible if you were suffering of a woman was fleeing domestic violence and the local authorities would not prosecute her spouse. It actually was possible to get asylum. And under the Trump administration, the first time, that all changed. The Attorney General said, no, that's not what the purpose of asylum is. They wanted to narrow it mostly to a political opinion. But that's not what even the 50s Refugees Convention says. The Refugee Convention says political opinion, race, religion, nationality, but also something called membership in a particular social group. And we were successful in arguing people fleeing domestic violence or fleeing gang violence could make out a case. But because the Attorney General changed all that, it made it very difficult under the first Trump administration to win those cases. When Mr. Biden became the president, that all reverted back to good guidance, relatively good guidance. Well, of course, I'm expecting any day now that the new Attorney General will once again revert back to what happened under the first Trump administration. And so to many listeners, you probably think it's a joke that our system is set up that way. And it would be funny, except that it affects the lives of real people. And so people are sent back and get deported who end up getting killed or beaten or tortured because of the political whims of the politicians that are in power.
You mentioned in the first episode that the immigration system is complex, that it's difficult to navigate, and it would seem that it's especially challenging to understand for asylum seekers. They have a better chance of winning their cases when they have legal representation. Could you explain why it is that many asylum seekers do not have legal representation? What are the obstacles?
Well, the obstacles are financial. The immigration laws state that you have a right to an attorney if you are in deportation or removal proceedings. You do have a right to an attorney, but then it says not at government expense. Not at government expense. So in a criminal case in the United States, if you're being charged with petty theft or marijuana possession and you're poor, then the government provides a free attorney for you, the public defender's office. There is no such equivalent in the immigration proceedings because the law defines immigration proceedings as not criminal in nature. It defines immigration proceedings as civil in nature. So it's considered a civil case rather than a criminal case. And so what happens is that if you're lucky, there is a community-based organization that might be able to help you for free. So that in most metropolitan areas of the United States, there are at least a handful of nonprofit organizations that will represent people. But all of them across the country, even before Mr. Trump took office again, all of them are at capacity. And so all of them have long waiting lists. So even the program that I run at the University of San Francisco, we represent over 400 cases. And we also have a waiting list of over 200 people. And so it's very difficult to get representation. So as a result, the vast majority of asylum seekers in removal proceedings don't have representation. And this is the shocking part. That is true even for unaccompanied minors. So somebody who is 10 years old or 12 years old, and this may sound unbelievable to your listeners, but there are unaccompanied minors that young who come to the United States, and they are expected to represent themselves in removal proceedings. And so, of course, my program, for example, we make it a priority if we find out about an unaccompanied minor. We do everything that we can to try to represent them. But I am still sure that people, even in the San Francisco area, who are minors, go unrepresented. So the chances of prevailing in an asylum case if you're unrepresented is less than 10%. And not that you're assured of victory if you're represented, but the data demonstrates that you have at least 3 times more likelihood of prevailing if you are represented, because the asylum law is complicated. It's not simple. It's not straightforward. And if you've been traumatized, then we have so many clients that are suffering from post-traumatic stress that it takes us many, many meetings to get the full story, or for them to even trust us, to tell us everything. And then sometimes they don't remember things until another meeting, and it takes patience and understanding. And the system is not set up that way. And I feel very, very badly for those who are forced to proceed without representation, because not every immigration judge is very sensitive to the problems that flow from suffering from post-traumatic stress.
Let's look at the immigration courts. You mentioned earlier during our conversation that at times it's a question of lack of resources when immigrants and asylum seekers want to seek legal representation. But looking specifically at the immigration courts, what are the challenges for them? Because you mentioned they are not ordinary courts, but when we look at those courts, what challenges do they face?
Right. Well, one, they don't have many resources, and two, they're not independent. In other words, they can get in trouble if they grant asylum too much. They can get in trouble if they're not deport too many people. There will be, the first time around, President Trump set up performance criteria, and it included that they could not grant asylum very often. And so it's ridiculous, because that has nothing to do with whether or not a case should be granted. So it discouraged judges to really look at the humanity behind their cases. In terms of resources, so let me give you an example. I had a client. Actually, this is not my client. It's somebody that I talked to her attorney about, who was abused as a child before she was adopted by an elderly couple in the United States from Russia, and when she came here as a young teenager, she manifested a lot of behavior problems, and so her adopted parents, who were older, they had never had children before, they basically gave up on her. And so she was out on the streets, and she committed minor petty theft, that type of thing. Then she got pregnant, and then she had a child. And she was, from the record, she was very loving of that child. And but at one point, she was very impatient with her child, who was, as I recall at that time, was about a year old, and she admitted to the daycare worker. She took the child to the daycare, and she admitted to the daycare worker that she had been frustrated, and that she threw her child against the wall onto the bed. Well, immediately, of course, the child care worker reported her, and it was legally responsible. And the person was convicted of child abuse. Okay. Well, that's awful. But at this point in the United States, the family law court does not automatically sever parental-child relationship, because that's too serious. What the family law court usually does in those circumstances is they make sure that the parents try to go to therapy, that if they need medication, they get their medication, that they do not give over custody to the person without first having regular visits, and then having monitored visits. They just don't trust the parent until many, many, many months or time has passed. And even then, it's not assured that the family law court will allow the parent to have custody again. So that is the process that a normal person would have had in what I just described to you, but not for this woman. Because she was put in removal proceedings, she was in detention, immigration detention. And her attorney tried to convince ICE, let her go also to family law court. Let her also have her therapy. Let her also do the anger management. Let her also have medication that is being prescribed. And ICE officials said no. And so by the time her deportation hearing occurred, the immigration judge said, well, where's the evidence that she is worthy of forgiveness? And her immigration attorney said, well, let her go to family law court. And the immigration judge said, I don't have the power to do that. So the immigration judge had no power to call a timeout, had no power to order ICE to take her to family law court, had no power to make sure she had therapy. So the judge said, well, because I don't have any power to do any of that, I only have one course that I can take, and that's to order her deported. And so he ordered her deported, and that automatically severed her ties with her child. Now, I'm not saying that she would have ever recovered custody of her child, but what I'm saying is that she never even got a chance. She never even got a chance to go to the family law court. And it's because the immigration court system is so arcane. It just has one vision. And the one vision is deportation as the general outcome without much authority. And so it's very frustrating to see that.
In the final part of this episode, I'd like to turn to the issue of activism. There are prominent examples of members of Congress who have taken a strong stance against restrictive immigration and asylum policies. There's the Abolish ICE movement, and we also know of immigrants themselves who have staged protests. So I wanted to ask you about your own position on immigration and asylum policy, and could you tell us how you reached this position?
Well, my position has come from working with the community for over 50 years, and also I should add, growing up in an immigrant community in a small town in Arizona. The population was only 5,000 people, and the majority of the population was of Mexican descent. And so I have known immigrant communities, even my own family. You know, I was born in the United States, but my parents are immigrants from China, and I have many relatives who are from China. So my positions coming from have grown from a position of experience with the communities and my experience with the immigration system and the courts. And it's very clear to me that the vast, vast majority of people who want to become lawful in the United States are decent, hardworking people who are not criminals, who are family-oriented, and who have strong values, in some circumstances, very conservative values about family and social values and crime and those kinds of things, much more conservative than me. And so it's relevant to one of your earlier questions. If there was a line that they could get in to apply for permanent residence, they would do that. But for many of them, there isn't. And so when I see asylum seekers and I read the purpose of asylum law, and the harsh positions that the U.S. government takes against asylum seekers, and the harsh positions that many immigration judges take that are not open-minded, I believe that because of what's at stake, if you make the wrong decision in asylum case, and what I mean by that is if you make the wrong decision in an asylum case, it's basically a possible death sentence. Because if you deny asylum to somebody who's claiming that they're going to be killed by the gang or killed by their spouse if they go back, if you're wrong and you deny it, that's a death sentence. And so because of that, on asylum, I believe that we should presume eligibility when somebody applies for asylum, and that it should be the government's burden to prove that the person will be persecuted beyond a reasonable doubt. Otherwise, you should allow the person stay here. And so the reason I would put such a high burden on that is that, to me, it's the same theoretical difference when it comes to criminal law. In criminal law in the United States, the theory is that we don't put somebody in jail unless we prove beyond a reasonable doubt that they are guilty. And the reason there's such a high burden on the government is that we don't want to make a mistake. We don't want to put somebody who is innocent in jail, right? And so if we're going to make a mistake in the criminal justice system, we would rather err on the side of allowing a guilty person go rather than putting a not guilty person in jail. I feel the same way in asylum. If we're going to make a mistake on asylum, then we should allow somebody to stay here even though they weren't going to be persecuted. We'd rather do that mistake than sending somebody to the country where they're going to be persecuted. Then so that's, I would rather make the mistake of sending somebody, letting somebody stay here who is not going to be persecuted, rather than sending somebody to the country who is going to be persecuted. So, I mean, that's my position on asylum, and I feel that way about most avenues of relief, that that we should be fairer in the proceedings, that immigration judges should be trained on trauma, the effect of trauma on clients, that immigration judges should be trained on being active listeners to understand that people are nervous when they're in court, and that the immigration judges should be culturally competent, because there's people behave in different ways, many times because of their culture and because of their gender. And as simple a thing as averting one's eyes, that some judges interpret, oh, that person wasn't willing to look at me straight in the face. But some people, that's their culture. They're humble, and they don't want to be disrespectful by appearing to be confrontational. And just simple things like that the immigration judges do not get regular training on different cultural aspects of the people that appear before them.
Your book strikes me as eminently practical. You set out measures that can be taken to transform the US immigration system. I wanted to ask you how one might make the case for this transformation, because when we look at the political context, we see these political interests playing out, and it seems public opinion is very polarized on the issue. So how, specific recommendations aside, how might we move forward on transforming the immigration system? Well,
in terms of the politics and how to get a majority of leaders, political leaders, to support the kinds of things that that I would advocate for, I'm sure that there are more brilliant minds than me in terms of what political buttons to push and how to form coalitions and that type of thing. In that sense, I'm not a political scientist that can come up with the correct political strategy to do this. But this is what I do know. What I do know is that, and I advocate for, is that I wish leaders and politicians would take the time to meet and get to know the people that are affected by their laws and policies. I wish they would go with me to the border. I wish they would sit down with me and my clients to understand where they're coming from. One of the criticisms that I have of President Biden and President Obama is that they bought into the rhetoric of the situation at the border was a crisis that we needed to stop. And they missed the opportunity to actually put a face on the individuals at the border, to explain who they are and why they were there. They weren't there to do us harm. They were there because they were fleeing violence. They missed an opportunity to explain about the root causes of migration and bought into just, well, let's just look at the problem at the border, not understanding why people are here. And I have hope that those kinds of conversations and those kinds of efforts that I attempt to do and that I encourage my students and whoever else I can get to listen to me to constantly be aware of the humanity that we are dealing with. I want to believe that slowly that people will understand, and maybe not in my lifetime, that the cycle of immigration policies will come around again, to be more humane. That's what drives me and motivates me. I'm motivated to do representation how I can, but I'm also motivated to try to urge the humanity that's necessary to treat people the way they deserve, and the dignity that they deserve.
Bill, thank you very much for sharing your insights and your reflection. That was Professor Bill Hing, Professor of Law and Migration Studies at the University of San Francisco. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sonja.